The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Kate Middleton sat quietly in the drawing room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. The events of the past week had left her feeling like a stranger in her own home, surrounded by whispers and sideways glances from palace staff who thought she couldn't hear them talking. It had started with a simple disagreement during a family dinner. Kate had suggested changes to the upcoming charity gala, ideas that she believed would make the event more meaningful and accessible to the people they were trying to help. Her passion for the cause had made her voice rise slightly as she explained her vision, her eyes bright with enthusiasm for making a real difference. But Camilla had seen it differently. The queen consort's face had hardened with each word Kate spoke, her lips pressing into a thin line that Kate had learned to recognize as a warning sign. When Kate finished speaking, the silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable, broken only by the gentle clinking of silverware against china. "That's quite enough," Camilla had said finally, her voice cutting through the air like ice. "We've been doing these events for decades without needing advice from someone who still doesn't understand how things work around here." The words had hit Kate like a physical blow. She had felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she looked around the table, seeing the uncomfortable expressions on everyone's faces. William had reached for her hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze, but even his support couldn't ease the sting of humiliation. Charles had been sitting at the head of the table, his expression thoughtful as he watched the exchange. Kate had expected him to remain neutral, as he often did during family tensions. But something in his eyes had shifted as he looked at his daughter-in-law's hurt expression. "Actually," Charles had said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of royal training, "Kate's suggestions have merit. Perhaps we should consider implementing some of them." The shock on Camilla's face had been immediate and unmistakable. Her fork had clattered against her plate as she turned to stare at her husband, her eyes flashing with anger that she tried to hide behind a forced smile. "Of course, darling," she had said through gritted teeth. "Whatever you think is best." But Kate knew that the matter was far from settled. She could see it in the way Camilla's hands had clenched in her lap, in the tight set of her shoulders as she excused herself from dinner early, claiming a sudden headache. Now, 3 days later, Kate was still dealing with the aftermath. Palace staff who had once been friendly and helpful had become distant and formal. Invitations to smaller family gatherings had mysteriously stopped arriving. Even the dogs seemed to sense the tension, staying closer to Kate's side as if offering their silent support. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Kate look up from her untouched tea. She expected to see one of the staff members, perhaps bringing news of another canceled appointment or changed schedule. Instead, she saw Charles himself, dressed casually in a tweed jacket and looking more relaxed than she had seen him in days. "Good morning, Kate," he said warmly, settling into the chair across from her. "You look like you could use some company." Kate managed a small smile, though she could feel the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. "Good morning, Charles. I'm fine, really. Just enjoying the quiet." But Charles had always been perceptive, and he could see through her polite facade. He had watched her grow from the nervous young woman who had first entered their family into the confident, caring person she had become. He knew when she was truly happy and when she was simply putting on a brave face for everyone else's benefit. "You know," he said gently, leaning forward slightly, "I've been thinking about your ideas for the charity gala. I'd like to hear more about them, if you're willing to share." The surprise on Kate's face was genuine. In all the years she had been part of the royal family, Charles had never sought out her opinion on official matters. He had always been kind and welcoming, but their relationship had remained somewhat formal, built on mutual respect rather than deep personal connection. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Very much so," Charles replied, and Kate could see that he meant it. There was something different in his manner today, a warmth and openness that made her feel like he was seeing her as more than just William's wife or the future queen. He was seeing her as Kate, the woman who cared deeply about making the world a better place. As Kate began to speak about her vision for the gala, her voice gradually grew stronger and more confident. She talked about creating spaces where people from different backgrounds could connect, about using the event to highlight real stories of hope and resilience rather than just raising money through expensive dinners and auctions. Charles listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her ideas. For the first time in days, Kate felt like herself again, like her thoughts and feelings mattered to someone in this vast, complicated family. "These are wonderful ideas, Kate," Charles said when she finished. I think we should move forward with them. But what about? Kate began, then stopped herself. She didn't want to mention Camilla's obvious disapproval, didn't want to put Charles in a difficult position between his wife and his daughter-in-law. What about what? Charles asked gently, though Kate could see in his eyes that he already knew what she was thinking. Nothing, Kate said quickly. I just want to make sure everyone is comfortable with the changes. Charles was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly against the arm of his chair. When he spoke again, his voice was firm but kind. Kate, you are part of this family. Your voice matters, your ideas have value, and your passion for helping others is exactly what this institution needs. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. The words were carefully chosen, but Kate understood their deeper meaning. Charles was telling her, without directly saying it, that he would support her even if it meant disagreeing with his wife. It was more than she had dared to hope for, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, and Charles reached across to pat her hand gently. We're family, Kate. That means we stand by each other, especially when things get difficult. As they continued talking, neither of them noticed the figure standing in the doorway, listening to every word. Camilla's face was a mask of controlled fury as she watched her husband offer the kind of support and encouragement that she felt should be reserved for her alone. The sight of them together, heads bent in intimate conversation, filled her with a rage that she struggled to contain. She turned and walked away silently, her mind already working on ways to remind everyone in the palace exactly who held the real power in this family. Kate might have Charles's ear today, but Camilla was determined to make sure it wouldn't last long. The battle lines were being drawn, though Kate didn't realize it yet. She was simply grateful to have found an unexpected ally in her father-in-law, someone who valued her thoughts and treated her with genuine respect. It would take time for her to understand that Charles's support would come with a price, and that Camilla's anger was far from finished with her. The weeks that followed Charles's show of support brought an unexpected warmth to Kate's daily life at the palace. For the first time since joining the royal family, she felt like she had a true advocate, someone who genuinely valued her perspective and wasn't afraid to say so publicly. Charles had kept his word about implementing her ideas for the charity gala. He had called meetings with the event planners, specifically requesting that Kate be included in all discussions. When she walked into the first planning session, she could see the surprise on the organizers' faces. They had clearly expected this to be handled in the traditional way, with minimal input from the younger royals. Kate has some innovative approaches I'd like us to explore, Charles had announced to the room, his tone leaving no doubt that this was not a request but a directive. I want her leading the creative direction for this year's event. Kate had felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as all eyes turned to her. This was her chance to prove that her ideas weren't just wishful thinking but practical solutions that could make a real difference. She had spent hours preparing for this moment, researching successful charity events from around the world and developing a comprehensive plan that balanced tradition with meaningful innovation. As she presented her vision, Kate watched the faces around the conference table gradually shift from skepticism to genuine interest. She proposed replacing the usual formal dinner with smaller, intimate gatherings where donors could meet the people their contributions would actually help. Instead of silent auctions with expensive artwork and jewelry, she suggested featuring items created by the beneficiaries of their charity work, handmade crafts from women in developing countries, artwork from children in underprivileged communities, books written by refugees who had rebuilt their lives. The goal isn't just to raise money, Kate explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's to create real connections, to help people understand that charity isn't just about writing checks. It's about recognizing our shared humanity. When she finished her presentation, the room was quiet for a moment. Then, Charles began to applaud, and the others quickly joined in. Kate felt a rush of pride and relief as she saw genuine enthusiasm in their expressions. Brilliant, said Mrs. Henderson, the longtime palace event coordinator who had seemed most resistant to change. This could revolutionize how we approach these events. Over the following days, Kate threw herself into the planning with an energy that surprised everyone, including herself. She worked closely with the staff, many of whom had initially been cool toward her after Camilla's obvious disapproval. But, as they saw her dedication and attention to detail, their attitudes began to shift. Kate made a point of learning everyone's names and asking about their families. She brought coffee to late-night planning sessions and never asked anyone to do something she wasn't willing to do herself. When they needed to test the lighting for the new intimate gathering spaces, Kate was on her hands and knees helping to arrange extension cords. When the catering team needed feedback on the new menu featuring foods from the countries they were supporting, Kate insisted on tasting every single dish. "She's not like what I expected," Kate overheard one of the younger staff members saying to another as they worked on seating arrangements. "I thought she'd be all about the glamour and photos, but she actually cares about getting things right." The comment made Kate smile to herself. This was exactly the kind of work that energized her, the opportunity to use her position for something meaningful rather than just ceremonial appearances. Charles noticed the change in Kate's demeanor immediately. She moved with more confidence through the palace halls. Her smile came more easily, and she spoke up more frequently during family discussions. He found himself genuinely enjoying their planning sessions, impressed by her thoughtfulness and creativity. "You've really found your stride with this," he told her one afternoon as they reviewed the final guest list. "I can see why William fell in love with you." Kate blushed at the compliment, but Charles's words meant more to her than he probably realized. For so long, she had felt like she was playing a role, trying to fit into expectations that never quite seemed to match who she really was. Now, for the first time, she felt like she was being valued for her authentic self. But their growing partnership was not going unnoticed by everyone in the palace. Camilla watched their collaboration with increasing frustration, her anger simmering just beneath her carefully maintained public composure. The queen consort had built her position carefully over many years, establishing herself as Charles's closest advisor and most trusted confidant. She had weathered the storms of public criticism and personal attacks, always keeping her eye on the long-term goal of securing her place in history as a respected royal consort. Now she felt that position being threatened by a younger woman who seemed to effortlessly capture Charles's attention and admiration. Worse, Kate's ideas were being praised by the media and the public, with early reports about the upcoming gala generating more positive coverage than royal charity events had received in years. Camilla began to notice things that irritated her more and more each day. The way Charles's face lit up when Kate entered a room. How he asked for Kate's opinion on matters that had traditionally been handled by established palace protocols. The easy laughter that came from his study when they were working together on gala details. She tried subtle approaches first, suggesting to Charles that perhaps they were giving Kate too much responsibility too quickly. "She's still learning how things work," Camilla said one evening as they prepared for bed. It might be overwhelming for her to take on such a major event. But Charles had simply smiled and shaken his head. "She's handling it beautifully, Camilla. In fact, I think we might learn something from her approach." The comment stung more than Camilla cared to admit. She had spent years perfecting her understanding of royal protocol and tradition, and now her husband seemed to be suggesting that Kate's fresher perspective was somehow superior. As the days passed, Camilla's attempts to undermine Kate's growing influence became less subtle. She would schedule conflicting appointments during Kate's planning meetings, forcing her to choose between royal duties and the gala work. She would make casual comments to staff members about the risks of making too many changes too quickly, sowing seeds of doubt about Kate's judgment. When these tactics failed to slow Kate's momentum, Camilla decided on a more direct approach. She arranged to have tea with several of the longtime palace staff members, the ones whose opinions carried weight, and who could influence how others viewed the changes happening around them. "I'm concerned about the direction things are heading," she confided to them, her voice carefully modulated to sound worried rather than angry. "Change can be good, of course, but we have traditions for a reason. They've served us well for generations." Some of the staff nodded sympathetically. They had their own concerns about the rapid pace of change, the additional work that Kate's innovative ideas required, and the pressure to learn new ways of doing things they had mastered long ago. "The king seems very supportive of the Duchess's ideas," ventured Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper. "Yes, he does," Camilla replied carefully. "Charles has always been generous with his encouragement, sometimes perhaps too generous. He sees the best in people, which is admirable, but can also lead to complications." The implication was clear without being stated directly. Camilla was suggesting that Charles's support for Kate might be more about his kind nature than his genuine belief in her abilities. But even as Camilla worked to build opposition to Kate's growing influence, she couldn't deny the evidence of her daughter-in-law's success. The gala planning was proceeding smoothly, with positive feedback from everyone involved. The media coverage was overwhelmingly supportive, with several publications praising the royal family's willingness to modernize their approach to charity work. Most frustrating of all, Kate seemed genuinely unaware of the political undercurrents swirling around her. She continued to work with enthusiasm and dedication, treating everyone with kindness and respect, including Camilla herself. During family dinners, Kate would update everyone on the gala's progress, her excitement infectious as she described the artists and beneficiaries who would be featured. She would ask Camilla for her thoughts and opinions, genuinely seeking her input and showing no awareness of the older woman's growing resentment. "What do you think about having some of the refugee families share their stories during the evening?" Kate asked during one such dinner. "I know it's different from how we usually do things, but I think people would be moved to hear directly from those we're trying to help." Camilla forced a smile, her response carefully neutral. "It's certainly an interesting idea, dear." But, inside, she was seething. Kate's success was making Camilla's own contributions feel diminished, and her husband's obvious pride in his daughter-in-law felt like a betrayal of their partnership. The battle for Charles's attention and approval was intensifying, though only one side seemed aware they were fighting. Kate continued to focus on her work, supported by Charles's encouragement and driven by her genuine desire to make a difference. The real test would come when Camilla decided that subtle opposition wasn't enough, and she would need to take more direct action to protect her position in the family hierarchy. The confrontation came on a gray Thursday morning, just 2 weeks before the charity gala. Kate was in the library, surrounded by folders and photographs, putting the finishing touches on the presentation boards that would tell the stories of the people their event would help. She had been working since early morning, completely absorbed in her task. The sound of sharp heels clicking against the marble floor should have been her first warning, but Kate was too focused on arranging a particularly moving photograph of a young mother who had started a small business with microloan funding to pay attention to approaching footsteps. "We need to talk." Kate looked up to find Camilla standing in the doorway, her posture rigid and her expression colder than Kate had ever seen it. Gone was any pretense of polite family concern. This was the queen consort in full authority mode, and Kate felt her stomach drop as she recognized the storm that had finally arrived. "Of course," Kate said, setting down the photograph carefully and turning to face Camilla fully. "What can I help you with?" Camilla stepped into the room and closed the door behind her with deliberate precision. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "You can help me by understanding your place in this family," Camilla said, her voice low but carrying unmistakable menace. "And by recognizing that there are consequences to overstepping boundaries." Kate felt her heart begin to race, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean. If I've done something wrong, please tell me so I can fix it. Don't play innocent with me," Camilla snapped, abandoning any pretense of civility. "You know exactly what you've been doing. Manipulating Charles, making him think you're some kind of visionary when you're just a commoner who got lucky enough to marry into this family." The words hit Kate like physical blows. She had always known that some people viewed her background as a weakness, but hearing it stated so bluntly by someone in her own family was devastating. "I've never tried to manipulate anyone," Kate said quietly. "I just want to help make our charity work more effective." "Help?" Camilla laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You want to help by undermining everything I've worked to build? By making Charles question approaches that have served this family well for decades?" Kate could see the real source of Camilla's anger now, and it wasn't really about the gala or even about charity work. This was about power and influence, about who had Charles's ear and his respect. Kate realized with growing clarity that she had unknowingly walked into a battle she never wanted to fight. "Camilla, I never intended to undermine you or anyone else," Kate said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear rising in her chest. "I respect everything you've accomplished, and I've learned so much from watching how you handle your duties." "Save your flattery," Camilla said sharply. "It won't work on me the way it works on Charles. I see right through you." Kate felt tears beginning to sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that showing weakness would only make this kind of confrontation worse. "What do you want from me?" Kate asked directly. "I want you to step back," Camilla said, moving closer until she was standing directly in front of Kate's chair. "I want you to tell Charles that you've realized the gala planning is more complicated than you thought, and that you'd prefer to let the experienced people handle it. I want you to remember that you're William's wife, not Charles's advisor." The demand was crystal clear, and so was the threat behind it. Kate could see in Camilla's eyes that this was not a request or a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. "And if I don't?" Kate asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Camilla's smile was sharp and dangerous. Then, you'll learn just how difficult life in this family can become for someone who doesn't know her place. You think the press has been kind to you so far? That can change very quickly. You think the staff respect you? That can disappear overnight. You think Charles will always support you? That's a much more fragile thing than you realize. Kate felt the blood drain from her face as she understood the full scope of what Camilla was threatening. The queen consort had the power to make her life miserable in countless ways, from orchestrating negative press coverage to turning the palace staff against her to poisoning Charles's opinion of her work. "You're threatening me," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm educating you," Camilla corrected coldly, "about how things really work in this family, about what happens to people who forget their position and try to take what isn't theirs." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other in silence. Kate could feel her hands trembling slightly as she processed what was happening. All the work she had put into the gala, all the excitement she had felt about finally finding her purpose within the royal family, all the confidence she had gained from Charles's support, Camilla was demanding that she throw it all away. "I need time to think," Kate said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning," Camilla replied. "I expect to hear that you've come to your senses by then." With that, she turned and left the room, her heels clicking against the floor with the same sharp precision as when she had arrived. Kate was left alone with her thoughts, and the photographs scattered across the table. Images of people whose lives might be improved by the work she was now being forced to abandon. Kate sat in the library for a long time after Camilla left, staring at the materials she had worked so hard to organize. The faces in the photographs seemed to look back at her accusingly, as if they already knew she was about to let them down. She thought about calling William, but what could she tell him? That his stepmother had threatened her? That the family unity they all worked so hard to maintain publicly was fracturing behind closed doors? William had enough pressures in his own role without having to mediate a conflict between his wife and his father's wife. As the afternoon wore on, Kate found herself thinking about Charles and the genuine enthusiasm he had shown for her ideas. Would he really abandon his support if Camilla pressured him to do so? Kate wanted to believe that his encouragement had been sincere, but Camilla's words had planted seeds of doubt. Maybe Charles had just been being polite when he praised her work. Maybe he had supported her ideas because he felt sorry for her, not because he truly believed in them. Maybe she really had overstepped her bounds and needed to accept her limitations. By evening, Kate had almost convinced herself that stepping back might be the right thing to do. The gala would still happen, just in the traditional way. The charity would still raise money. The only thing that would change is that she would retreat to her expected role as William's supportive wife rather than trying to be a leader in her own right. But, as she prepared to leave the library, Kate's eyes fell on one particular photograph that had been her favorite throughout the planning process. It showed a young girl in Rwanda, maybe 8 years old, holding up a certificate she had received for completing a literacy program funded by their charity work. The girl's smile was radiant, her eyes bright with hope and possibility. Kate picked up the photograph and studied it carefully. This little girl didn't care about palace politics or power struggles. She cared about having the chance to read, to learn, to build a better future for herself and her family. The gala Kate had been planning would tell her story and stories like hers, helping donors understand the real impact of their contributions. If Kate stepped back now, those stories might never be told. The traditional approach would focus on raising money, but it wouldn't create the personal connections that Kate believed were essential for lasting change. The people who needed their help would become statistics instead of human beings with names and dreams and struggles. Kate set the photograph down carefully and made her decision. She would not step back. She would not abandon the work that had brought her more satisfaction than anything else she had done as a member of the royal family. Whatever consequences Camilla had threatened, Kate would face them. But first, she needed to talk to Charles. She needed to know if his support was real or if she had been fooling herself about their partnership. Tomorrow would bring either her vindication or her downfall, but at least she would face it with her integrity intact. As Kate finally left the library, she didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows in the hallway. One of Camilla's most loyal staff members had been positioned to observe Kate's reaction to the confrontation, and the report that would reach the queen consort within the hour would not be what she wanted to hear. Kate Middleton was not backing down, which meant the real battle was just beginning. Kate barely slept that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what she would say to Charles and trying to prepare herself for every possible reaction he might have. By the time dawn broke, She had decided that honesty was her only option. She would tell him about Camilla's ultimatum and let him make his own choice about how to proceed. She found Charles in his private study at 7 in the morning, earlier than she had ever approached him before. He was already dressed and reading through correspondence, a cup of tea steaming on the desk beside him. When she knocked on the open door, he looked up with surprise and genuine concern. "Kate, you look tired. Is everything all right?" The kindness in his voice nearly broke her resolve. It would be so much easier to simply tell him she had reconsidered the gala plans, to retreat gracefully, and avoid the confrontation that was about to engulf them all. But the memory of that little girl's photograph gave her strength. "Charles, I need to tell you about something that happened yesterday," Kate began, settling into the chair across from his desk. "And I need to ask you a direct question about whether your support for my work is genuine." Charles set down his papers and gave her his complete attention. "Of course it's genuine. What's happened?" Kate took a deep breath and told him everything. She described Camilla's confrontation, the threats that had been made, and the ultimatum she had been given. She watched Charles's face carefully as she spoke, seeing his expression shift from surprise to anger to something that looked like sadness. When she finished, Charles was quiet for a long moment. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where the morning mist was beginning to lift. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said finally. "And I'm sorry that my support for your work has put you in this position." Kate felt her heart sink. Was this Charles's polite way of telling her that he couldn't continue to back her against his wife's wishes? "But I want you to know," Charles continued, turning back to face her, "that my admiration for your ideas and your dedication has nothing to do with politeness or pity. You've brought fresh thinking to work that had become routine, and you've reminded all of us why we do this in the first place." Relief flooded through Kate, but she knew this was only the beginning of the conversation. "What happens now?" she asked. "Camilla made it clear that there would be consequences if I don't step back." Charles returned to his chair, his expression serious but resolute. "What happens now is that we move forward with your vision for the gala exactly as planned, and we deal with whatever consequences arise." "But she's your wife," Kate said quietly. "I don't want to cause problems in your marriage." "Kate, my marriage is my responsibility to manage. Your responsibility is to continue the excellent work you've been doing. Don't let anyone intimidate you into abandoning something you believe in." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Before Charles could respond, Camilla entered the room, her eyes immediately taking in the scene. Charles and Kate in what was obviously a private, serious conversation. "How cozy," Camilla said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Actually, you are," Charles said calmly. "Kate and I were discussing the final arrangements for the gala." "Were you indeed?" Camilla's smile became sharper. How dedicated of her to be working so early in the morning. Though I suppose some people need more time than others to understand complex responsibilities. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Kate felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Charles stood up. "Camilla, I think we need to have a conversation about appropriate behavior toward family members," he said, his voice carrying a warning that Kate had never heard before. "Do we?" Camilla replied, not backing down despite the obvious tension in Charles's posture. "I was simply observing how much time our dear Kate seems to require for tasks that more experienced people handle efficiently." "The task you're referring to," Charles said, his voice growing colder, "is innovative charity work that has already generated more positive attention than we've received in years. Kate's efficiency and creativity have been exemplary." Kate could see the shock on Camilla's face as Charles continued his defense. This was clearly not how she had expected this confrontation to unfold. "Charles, surely you can't be serious about proceeding with all these changes," Camilla said, her composure beginning to slip. "People expect certain standards from royal events. We can't simply throw out decades of tradition because someone has new ideas." "We're not throwing out tradition," Charles replied firmly. "We're building on it. We're making it better and more meaningful. That's exactly what the monarchy should be doing." "Since when do you take advice about what the monarchy should be doing from someone who wasn't even born into it?" Camilla snapped, abandoning all pretense of politeness. The silence that followed was deafening. Kate felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Camilla had finally said what she really thought, and there was no taking it back. Charles's expression hardened in a way that Kate had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried unmistakable authority. "That comment was unacceptable, Camilla." Kate is a member of this family, and she deserves the same respect that any of us would expect. More importantly, the value of someone's ideas has nothing to do with the circumstances of their birth. Oh, please, Camilla said, her anger now fully unleashed. Don't pretend this is about respect or ideas. This is about you being charmed by a pretty young woman who makes you feel important and relevant. She's manipulating you, Charles, and you're too flattered to see it. Kate gasped at the accusation, but Charles's reaction was swift and decisive. That's enough, he said, his voice cutting through Camilla's words like a blade. I will not tolerate this kind of personal attack on Kate or this level of disrespect toward my judgment. You owe her an apology. I absolutely will not apologize, Camilla replied defiantly. Not when I'm the only one brave enough to tell you the truth about what's happening here. Charles walked to his desk and pressed the button that would summon his private secretary. When the man appeared moments later, Charles spoke without taking his eyes off Camilla. Please reschedule all of the Queen Consort's appointments for today. She'll be taking some time to reflect on appropriate behavior. The secretary's eyes widened slightly, but he simply nodded and withdrew. Kate realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. Charles was essentially placing his wife in timeout like a misbehaving child. You can't be serious, Camilla said, her voice rising. You're going to embarrass me publicly because of her. I'm giving you the opportunity to reconsider your approach before you embarrass yourself further, Charles replied. Kate has done nothing wrong except work hard and propose good ideas. Your behavior toward her has been inappropriate and needs to stop. Camilla looked back and forth between Charles and Kate, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. Kate could see the exact moment when the Queen Consort realized that she had overplayed her hand, that her attempt to force Charles to choose between them had backfired spectacularly. This isn't over, Camilla said finally, directing the comment toward Kate rather than Charles. Yes, it is, Charles replied firmly. This particular conversation is definitely over. After Camilla left, slamming the door behind her, Charles and Kate sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Kate felt emotionally exhausted by the confrontation, but also strangely relieved. The battle she had been dreading was finally out in the open. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Charles said eventually. And I'm sorry it took so long for me to address the situation directly. You didn't have to defend me like that, Kate replied. I know it puts you in a difficult position. Charles shook his head. Kate, defending what's right is never the wrong position to be in. Your work matters, your ideas have value, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Those aren't negotiable points. As they returned to discussing the gala details, Kate felt a shift in their relationship. This was no longer just about Charles supporting her professional efforts. This was about him recognizing her as a full partner in the family's mission, someone whose contributions were valued not despite her background, but because of the unique perspective it gave her. The road ahead would still be challenging, Kate knew. Camilla's anger hadn't disappeared, and there would likely be more conflicts to navigate. But now Kate knew with certainty that she wasn't facing those challenges alone. Charles had made his choice, and he had chosen to stand by her when it mattered most. The night of the charity gala arrived with a crispness in the air that seemed to mirror the electric energy surrounding the event. Kate stood before the mirror in her dressing room, adjusting the simple but elegant navy dress she had chosen. Unlike the elaborate gowns typically worn to such events, she had deliberately selected something understated that wouldn't overshadow the real stars of the evening, the people whose stories they would be sharing. The past week had been a whirlwind of final preparations, media interviews, and careful navigation of palace politics. Camilla had maintained a cold but correct demeanor in public, fulfilling her royal duties while making it clear through subtle gestures and strategic silences that her anger had not diminished. But she had stopped her direct attacks on Kate, perhaps realizing that Charles's support was unshakable. A soft knock interrupted Kate's thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting to see William or one of her staff members. Instead, Charles entered, looking distinguished in his formal evening wear but with an expression of genuine warmth that had become increasingly familiar over the past weeks. I wanted to speak with you before the evening begins, he said, settling into the chair near the window. How are you feeling? Kate smiled, surprised by how calm she felt despite the magnitude of the evening ahead. Nervous, but excited. I keep thinking about all the people who will be here tonight, and all the people whose lives might be changed because of the connections we make. That's exactly the right way to think about it, Charles replied. You know, I've been attending these events for decades, and I haven't felt this genuinely enthusiastic about one in years. You've reminded me why we do this work in the first place." The words meant more to Kate than any formal recognition could have. Over the weeks of working together, she and Charles had developed a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. It wasn't the relationship she had expected to have with her father-in-law, but it was one she treasured. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Charles continued, his tone becoming more serious. "The media attention tonight will be significant, and there will inevitably be questions about the changes we've made to the traditional format. Some people will try to create controversy or suggest there are divisions within the family." Kate nodded, understanding the subtext. The conflict with Camilla was bound to generate speculation, and the press would be watching for any signs of tension. "I want you to know," Charles continued, "that whatever questions arise, whatever criticism might be directed at these innovations, I stand behind them completely. More importantly, I stand behind you." The simple declaration carried enormous weight. Kate knew that Charles was not just talking about supporting her ideas, but about publicly backing her against any criticism that might arise, even if some of that criticism came from within his own family. "Thank you," Kate said quietly. "That means everything to me." As they prepared to leave for the main event, Kate felt a confidence she had never experienced before at a royal gathering. This wasn't just another obligation to fulfill or protocol to follow. This was her vision coming to life, supported by someone who genuinely believed in its importance. The gala itself exceeded even Kate's highest expectations. The intimate gathering spaces she had designed created exactly the kind of meaningful connections she had hoped for. Donors found themselves in deep conversations with refugees who had started successful businesses, with mothers who had gained access to education, with young people who had been given opportunities to develop their talents. Kate moved through the evening like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, ensuring that each interaction was meaningful and that every story was heard. She watched with satisfaction as she saw sophisticated London socialites wiping away tears as they listened to accounts of resilience and hope. The highlight of the evening came when Amara, a young woman from Somalia who had become a successful engineer with the help of their educational programs, took the stage to speak about her journey. As Amara shared her story of fleeing conflict, learning English, and eventually graduating with honors from university, the entire room was captivated. "The people who made my education possible," Amara said, looking out at the audience, "they didn't just give me money. They gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be. They saw my potential when I couldn't see it myself." Kate felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the audience's reaction. This was exactly what she had envisioned. Not just charity, but recognition of shared humanity and mutual possibility. As the evening wound down, Kate was surprised to see the positive reaction from even the most traditional attendees. Lord Pemberton, who had initially been skeptical of the changes, approached her with genuine enthusiasm. "My dear, this has been the most meaningful royal event I've attended in 30 years, he said. "You've created something truly special here." Similar comments came from donors, staff members, and even some of the palace's most protocol-conscious advisors. Kate began to realize that the evening wasn't just a success. It was a transformation of how their charity work could operate going forward. Near the end of the evening, Kate noticed Camilla across the room, speaking with a group of longtime supporters. To Kate's surprise, Camilla was smiling and seemed to be genuinely engaged in conversation. When their eyes met briefly across the crowded space, Camilla gave a small nod that might have been acknowledgement, if not approval. Later, as the last guests were departing, Charles found Kate in the quiet moment between public performance and private reflection. "You should be very proud," he told her. "This evening will be talked about for years as a turning point in how the royal family approaches charitable work." "We should be proud," Kate corrected gently. "None of this would have been possible without your support." Charles smiled, but his expression became thoughtful. "Kate, I want you to know that what happened tonight, the success of your vision, it's just the beginning. I've been watching you work, seeing how you approach problems and connect with people. You have gifts that this family needs, and I hope you'll continue to use them." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of William, who had been mingling with guests throughout the evening, but had clearly been watching his wife's triumph with pride. "I'm not sure which one of you looks more pleased with yourselves," William said with a grin, putting his arm around Kate's waist. "Your wife has just revolutionized royal charity work," Charles told his son. "I think we're both entitled to look pleased." As the three of them stood together, Kate reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. She had begun this journey simply wanting to contribute something meaningful to the family's charitable efforts. She was ending it with a new understanding of her own capabilities and a partnership with Charles that would influence their work for years to come. The conflict with Camilla wasn't entirely resolved. Kate suspected there would always be an underlying tension there, rooted in fundamental differences about power and tradition. But Charles's unwavering support had made it clear that Kate's voice and vision had a permanent place in the family's future. More importantly, Kate had learned something crucial about herself. She didn't have to choose between honoring the traditions of her new family and staying true to her own values and instincts. With the right support and the courage to stand firm when challenged, she could do both. As they finally left the venue, Kate looked back at the space that had hosted such meaningful conversations throughout the evening. Tomorrow, the venue would return to its usual elegant emptiness, but the connections made tonight would continue to grow and flourish. The little girl in the photograph from Rwanda would probably never know that her bright smile had helped give Kate the courage to stand up for her vision. But somewhere in the decisions that would be made based on tonight's success, that little girl and thousands of others like her would benefit from Kate's determination to create something better than what had existed before. Charles had stood by Kate when it mattered most, and together they had proven that positive change was possible even within institutions as traditional and complex as the British royal family. The quiet strength of his support had been more powerful than all of Camilla's anger, and Kate knew that this partnership would continue to create opportunities for meaningful work in the years to come. As their car pulled away from the venue, Kate felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had found her voice within the royal family, and she had learned that sometimes the most profound changes begin with simple acts of courage and the support of those who believe in doing what's right, even when it's difficult.